Logistics.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Sustainiacs. I'm Michael Vincent. I have a new Sustainiac in the room. Well, maybe she might not know she's a Sustainiac, but she really is because of what she's doing. She's a co-founder of the Alliance for Responsible Capitalism. And her name is Amy Gobel. I think I nailed that, right? I pronounced Amy correctly, didn't I?
Yeah, that's
I did.
10 out of 10.
10 out of 10. Fantastic. It's much easier than I met a Piotr, Piotr. And that is not easy.
There are no surprise R roles in my name, at least. And the Gobel, you got it right on. The joke in my family growing up was you could tell whether it was someone we knew or a telemarketer by whether they said Gobel or Gobel. If they said Gobel, they didn't know us.
Yeah, see, I would thought it might be Gobel, just because of the location that is listed on your LinkedIn is what is it, Schaffhausen?
Yeah. I live in Zurich, Switzerland, and I work in Schaffhausen.
Yeah. So I figured, well, okay, could be a European type of thing, but then we just met, and I was like, oh, okay, yeah, it's not it's Gobel for sure.
Yeah.
But hey, so how are you? Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, glad to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Are you in Zurich right now?
Yes, I'm in Zurich. And just
Thanks
to
for
go
staying
back
up late.
to the teaser at the beginning, yes, I consider myself a Sustainiac. So
okay, fantastic.
Fully on board there.
Okay, great. So let's get into it. So it is, and I've got it up here, the alliance4rc.org is what it is the, it's
exactly.
it's just alliance4rc.org is the website. And I pulled it up because I want to go through, obviously need to do some homework and go through this, but I haven't read much about it. I just assumed that responsible capitalism has to do with sustainability and understanding that sustainability is really a core value of business and really should be a core value of why you're in business, which is slightly different, right?
Yeah. We are focused on aligning corporate political influence with sound climate policy. And to perhaps go a little bit into the backstory, we call ourselves the Alliance for Responsible Capitalism rather than having something that's sustainability or climate centric in our names, because our original analysis is that all of the big problems that are facing society today, climate change, exploding inequality, weakening institutions, and loss of trust in democracy come down to the same root cause, which is an excess of corporate influence in the political landscape. And that influence being used in a way that is not tending to the long-term health of the system that we're in, rather focused on short-term interests. But, we're currently a 2-person all-volunteer organization. And that's kind of a big topic to tackle for our current resources. So we said, okay.
2 people, holy cow. How do you manage?
It's a good question. It's nights and weekends and lots of love.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, you are committed to getting this thing done. That is, I love the angle because I understand the angle, and it is an angle, and it is an issue that comes to mind quite often, especially in the political climate here in the U.S. These days.
Absolutely.
There is no virtue or thought behind even outside of the private enterprise influence on politics. Hell, the insiders, no matter what party, and there's only really 2 in the United States. There's some that pretend to be another one, but they're really factions of the same one. Their goal is just power. It is just very short term, and they openly say it, and nobody calls them out on it. If one party loses or does something, all their speech is now, how do we get back in power? I mean, they openly say that. We need to figure out new ideas so we can get back into power. Well, why? Why is that the goal? Shouldn't you be talking about new ideas to make things better? Isn't that really the goal? No, no, no. It's to have a D or an R in front of your political establishment to have it in power.
Mhm.
Shouldn't everybody on the planet's bells be going off going, whoa, what? They're openly saying it's just about power. They openly say it. It's crazy.
That's one of the things that we thought a lot about in setting up our organization and setting up the
Right.
language that we're using. We are political, but we are not partisan. We
Gotcha.
You have to be willing to go into these really controversial spaces. You have to be willing to take on really explosive topics like
Yeah.
the ESG, right? That we did a big student competition around that this year, which is perhaps one of the most volatile topics in at least the financial sector right now, with
Sure.
banks getting sued all over the place for talking about ESG. Um, and so
It's
we're going into those spaces, but it has to be in a way that is not about the power play of parties, but is about what are we actually here for? The what is the purpose of business? And I think I loved your episode, your conversation with Stu Hart, by the way, and I feel like there's a
oh
lot of
man, he's
resonance with
he's
that.
he's amazing. That was that
Yeah.
and what a history lesson. Golly.
And to kind of reference some of those ideas, there have been these different evolutions of capitalism as long as capitalism has been around, but sort of the license to operate has always, to a certain extent, been it's for the best. It is for the good of the system, right? In the 1950s, more stakeholder capitalism, it was businesses have a responsibility to actually do right by the communities in which they're invested. And
Yeah.
even Milton Friedman argued that when we shifted away from that stakeholder capitalism um, to the shareholder primacy model, it was because his models showed that would generate the best outcome for everyone, right? He was
Right.
in it. The ideas were to make the system work better, to have better alignment between managers' incentives and the incentives of the shareholders. It wasn't like, you had people rubbing their hands and cackling in glee about how they were going to undo the structure of society. It was because they thought that they were doing the right thing. And
Yeah.
that's what we want to get back to, arguing on principles, arguing for values, arguing for, like, I hope it's not too bold to argue that everyone is in it for responsible corporate actors. We can debate about what responsibility looks like, but let's start from that common place and then figure it out together.
It is a very dangerous topic. It's a very dangerous word to use. Um, but I encourage you to use it, and I'm going to use it more and more, and have more and more, because I've had conversations where I'm like, oh wow, we sound like we're socialists, but that's not it at all. And when I spoke to Stuart, and had that, which is a fantastic episode. I agree with you guys, brilliant. I debated on whether to publish it or not because his brilliance, I look like an idiot, but because he's so
We all do.
smart, guy's
Don't
so
worry.
man is so he is so intelligent and understands everything and so passionate about it. But that's where I really go, oh, you're right. It's virtuous capitalism. It's responsible capitalism. It's not. That's what we're talking about here. We're not, and because ESG is an explosive term because of what people labeled it to mean, not
Mhm.
by what it really means. It's the same thing with sustainability. It's been labeled as this, and I had this conversation with my good friend um, uh, um, Maureen O'Gorman, who she's fantastic, but it's labeled. You're almost a tree hugger. You're immediately polarized way over here as this extremist environmentalist if you say ESG or environmental, and it's a scam and it's anti-capitalism and it's all this stuff, which isn't even close to being true. It's not even close to being true. We're talking about business 101, in my opinion.
And
right?
that's why we
From that
have
sense.
capitalism in our name, right? It
Right.
creates some strong reactions because, you know, the we're talking we're putting capitalism front and center, and then we're talking about climate policy. And the people that are really passionate about aggressive climate policy maybe are more skeptical of the capitalism piece. And we're saying this is the best system that we have come up with to be able to pivot, to a lot, to drive innovation, to create growth where growth matters. But the problem with the structure of our economy right now is that the incentives are not aligned to do the innovation and the growth that is necessary. It's a classic case of market externalities. Like, you go to any intro microeconomics class and you talk about public goods and public bads. The public goods are the things that maybe companies produce secondarily to their products and that are good for
Mm,
everyone. And
mm,
those tend to be get under investment because the company doesn't reap the full rewards of those public goods. Think about upskilling workers. That's something that the company has to invest a lot in, but then the employees might leave. So why bother, right? And the public
mm.
bads are things like carbon emissions, where the company gets the short-term benefit of the easiest, cheapest, fastest way to do things, but
Right.
everyone pays the consequences. And that is a classic example of where you need some external intervention. It's a market failure. So you need to change how the market is set up so that the incentives are aligned. So that's why there's so much consensus across the political spectrum that something like a carbon tax would be good. That is a technology neutral approach. The thing that creates debate along the political spectrum is what you do with the revenue that you raise. But if you do a revenue neutral carbon tax where you're not actually increasing the amount of government revenue, it's just correcting the fact that carbon emissions create problems for the entire economy. That helps move capitalism collectively towards more responsible behavior. So then you aren't having to fight tooth and nail for those individual business cases for doing what is in air quotes the right thing. I mean, the right thing being investing in decarbonizing the economy, which we
Mm.
fully believe. You don't have to fight for that and contort yourself to make a business case, because then the business case is already there. Right now, a lot of the time, the business case might not be there, even though it is the right thing. We want to move the economy in that direction. So that's why we say capitalism is the right structure, but you need the right guardrails to be in place.
Yeah, well, I agree with you because capitalism is the right structure. Because forcing it on people never works. It may work for a time, but it'll eventually either destroy innovative technology or growth, and then it foments insurrection and so on and so forth, and then things collapse. It just naturally does. Then people get pissed off and they take to arms, and everything gets destroyed and rebuilt again. Right? I mean, it's
Mhm.
just that's what occurs. If you take it to its extreme, which we have as a human race many times over, right? we've done this. We've gone down this road for many different reasons. It may
We've
not be
seen
for
that
this,
movie.
but we've done it, seen it too many times, right? And it's occurred too many times to be 100% confident that we couldn't do it again, because we could easily do it again. And it feels like we're on the precipice of one of these. We either do it right or we do it wrong,
Mhm.
which is interesting. And it's interesting to me that what your view is, because I get a strong glimpse of the world stage and where people are based on my podcast and the business that I'm in. But obviously my lens is blurred through the U.S., where I'm at in North America and the U.S. Are the same struggles that you're looking at or that we're at the same throughout capitalism, throughout the world? Because here it is probably people freak out over the Dow. Is the Dow up or the Dow down? Oh, the Dow went down 500. Well, it's going to go down 300 or 1,000 now because people think, oh, it went down 500. Something sucks.
Mm-hmm.
Sell it all up, right? And it isn't even a reflection on what the economy is really doing. It's just how do people feel about it? So if you just say, "Hey, the economy is great," long enough, they'll just keep going up. Just don't tell them the truth, and the Dow will keep going up. You know what I'm saying? But dare to tell them the truth, and you lose everything. It's crazy. Are the same things happening? Do you see the same sentiments across Europe and the rest of the world as you do here?
I should probably offer the disclaimer, I live in Switzerland, but our work is very much focused on the United States right now.
Okay,
So I'll
gotcha.
say I'm no expert, but my impression is that
Okay,
as when democratically elected leaders are not responding to the needs of their population for whatever reason, then there is conflict. Then there is a loss of
yeah,
trust in institutions. And then it can go one of two ways. You can get a doubling down on strengthening democracy, or you can get a loss of trust and a challenge and a move towards more authoritarianism.
yeah.
So, at the risk of um, perhaps stretching my recent politics too much, I
What?
would say I think Poland is an example where they had a strong flirtation with authoritarianism, and then the population realized this wasn't actually responding to our needs, and then there was a shift
Mm,
back towards, okay, actually we're doubling down on the democracy thing. And
yeah,
whereas in Germany recently there was a bit of a swing in the other direction. The Alternative für Deutschland party uh,
yeah,
had a surprising surge in the polls during the last election, um, endorsed by Elon Musk, got
yeah.
a lot of buzz, and they represent a far right, more authoritarian approach to government. And the government is currently being formed. They haven't yet found a coalition. There's, I think, a broad agreement that the Alternative für Deutschland is not supposed to be in the
Yeah, yeah,
ruling
yeah,
coalition, but they had a huge resurgence in popularity because
yeah.
the government was not actually able to respond to the needs of the population. But what's happening, to bring it back to the US and where I have a little more confidence in what I'm talking
Yeah,
about.
no, that's great. No, I mean, you have
Um,
tremendous insights because I guarantee you 90% of the people watching this had no idea what you just said had occurred.
let's hope. And if, please fact check me. Um, in the US, we see that. And to your earlier point about, parties, both parties saying not what do people need, but what is going to put us in power, um,
Yeah,
it's not responding to what people are looking for, which is a level of economic security, a feeling of the confidence that was part of the American ethos in the post World War boom, right? That's that feeling of reaching back to that feeling of prosperity where every generation could do better than the next. Well, now they can't, right? The
right,
In the last 20 years, you had a greater than 50% chance of not actually earning more than your parents. And that's a scary
right.
place to be in.
It
And
is.
if the politicians aren't responding to that really fundamental need, then of course there's going to be a loss of trust. But the problem is, and to come to our thesis, the reason that there's a disconnect is not because the leaders are stupid or not because the leaders are entirely just bad people, but because in order to get elected, they need funding that is coming from not the base on which their not their electorate base, but rather high net worth individuals and corporations. And when
Yeah.
they're in office, who do they listen to? They're not listening to the broad base of the electorate, but they're listening to the high net worth individuals and the corporations that helped get them
I
into
mean,
power
but
in the
I
first
mean,
place.
they're the power lobbyists in reality, is what
Mm-hmm.
they do. I mean, this happens. It's happening right now in Washington and in most
Yeah.
governments. There's lobbyists there taking people to lunch and having 5, 6 martinis and all this other kind of stuff and filling war chests and all that kind of stuff to get legislation pushed or ignored or whatever it happens to
Mm-hmm.
be at election time. That's just the high stakes, right? Is filling those war chests. That's the high stakes of it. Um, I don't know how you solve that. You guys, so I've been looking at this from let's break this down a little bit. I've been looking at this from the sense of convincing the strategists and the operations managers, the CFOs, the CEOs, COOs in the private organization that sustainability and virtuous capitalism are good for your business and they can be baked into efficient production methods, efficient and responsible marketing that works, et cetera. Because I contend that marketing is one of the biggest maybe accidental evildoers, right? They could be accidental accomplices, but they have a huge influence, if not responsibility, in what we're talking about. Is convincing people of the right thing, right? And what is virtuous and what is good for the long run, because we've been convinced and convinced and convinced that, man, as long as I can order it on my phone and they deliver my toothpaste in an hour by drone, that's what I want. There isn't a single consumer on the planet that wants that. Nobody rose their hand and said, you know what, this is what I want. Please get this for me. No, we were sold that. And that is not going to be a sustainable future doing that type of stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're hitting it from the side of how do and how do you impact the political influence of capitalism, right? Not necessarily what are they producing, like you were talking about the good and bad, or is that mixed in with your political influence that you're trying to manage with these companies?
I would argue that if we want to um, if we want to green our operations, if then we need to have the market incentives aligned to drive that innovation.
Okay.
Uh, I I was working in a company that was trying to prioritize, let's say, incorporating more recycled plastic or reducing the amount of plastic waste that was generated during operations. And
Right.
that was such a low priority. The company could look at revenue or they could look at costs, and they were focused on revenue and increasing production, which meant not stopping the manufacturing lines to do the types of retrofits that would have allowed them to produce more efficiently, because growing revenue was a more powerful lever for business growth than decreasing
Right.
costs.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Until the European Union started talking about plastic taxes. And then all of a sudden, the script flipped, because then actually there was much more of an incentive to focus on the amount of plastic material that was being
But
used.
it spurs private enterprise to make it happen, right?
Exactly, exactly.
Because what the problem you're talking about there is there wasn't a drop in like similar cost solution. And that's part recycling issue, it's part logistics issue, and it's part, like you said before, shareholder primacy issue, right? But it's also demand from the public issue, it's marketing issue. Because if I don't care if my bottle caps are all black, and some of them aren't red, and some of them aren't yellow, and some of them aren't white, then you got a drop in solution right now. Every bottle cap could be 100% recycled right now,
Mm-hmm.
but they can't because marketing wants it to be red.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's the only reason in many cases, right? So what I'm saying is, like you said, the tax spurs people to go, maybe we can do things a bit differently.
Mhm.
And you have to solve it. So I agree with those legislations when they do that type of stuff, um, because it's going towards the right thing. As long as it's not taking us, because there's a lot of legislation that we were just talking about, lobbyists, where it's done because of money and it's not necessarily the best thing for people, right? And that's hard. That's part of it too, right? How do you navigate that? That's a land. That's a wow. That's a tract of land that's just chock full of landmines to try and get through that. How are you different if you want a carbon tax from this person who just wants to do it to increase this whatever it is, that's not good for anybody, but we'll just say it is.
Mhm. So we stop short of venturing specific policy recommendations. I like the idea
Yeah,
of a carbon tax because you can demonstrate so easily that it creates the right, it captures that market externality dynamic. You can
yeah,
show with
yeah.
simulation models how it would drive down carbon emissions through spurring the types of innovations that you're talking
Well,
about.
it creates jobs and new technologies as
Yeah,
well. It's not it
yeah,
doesn't drag anybody down. It's not a intelligence suck. It's not a capital suck. It's none of that. It actually creates a blue ocean of opportunity.
yeah.
That's where. So I'm landing on. Please continue. I'm sorry. I had to go. Amen, sister. Keep preaching.
Yes, absolutely. Um, we want to take one step back and just ask companies to look seriously at the trade-offs when they're evaluating policy proposals. And I think the Inflation Reduction Act is the perfect example of ways where companies might have prioritized the short term over the long term. They might have prioritized thinking about short-term profits over the long-term evolution that society needs to make. So
Mm,
you're used to making that argument to executives and managers on why sustainability in operations is the right thing. And I have two examples of why this should be such an urgent call to action for business. One is the En-ROADS climate simulation model from MIT and Climate Interactive, which allows you to play around with what types of policy interventions you might do and how does that change the expected global warming by the end of the century. And
yeah.
with that model, they have a financials segment that allows you to see, okay, what is the financial impact of these decisions and what are the losses due to climate change. Um, with with the status quo, we can predict that by the end of the century, the annual economic damages due to climate change are larger than the size of the economy globally today.
Wow.
Business should care about that. And
Well, they should, and if you argue it and you do it in the boardrooms to the point where you can actually show, because it's occurring, where the natural resources that you need are becoming unavailable
Mhm.
because of the impact, which is a reality. I mean, people argue climate change or not. Argue why it's occurring. I don't care. Is it occurring? Yeah, it absolutely is. There's facts you can see, and there's raw materials going away. Can you positively impact it, even though you might not be the reason it's happening? Let's just take away all that crap. Yes, you can. We can positively impact it, even if we're not the cause. So get over yourself, and let's. That's my opinion. Sorry.
Yeah. Amen.
Amen. But I mean,
And
it's so.
mhm,
I mean, is that's how you're talking to to corporations, right? I mean, the impact. They say, well, yeah, by 2050 or the end of the century or whatever it
mhm.
happens to be, we've got a long time. Somebody will figure it out, right? No,
But that's the
it's
second,
occurring now. The steps
yeah,
are happening now.
yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
That's the second point. There was a great LinkedIn post recently by the former CEO of Alliance Insurance. It basically laid out why climate change is not just a long-term risk, not something far out there, but it's an existential threat to capitalism. because we're already starting to see insurance markets break down. And if you don't have
Mm.
insurance, then you don't have finance. And if you don't have finance, that's the very underpinning of our entire economic system, right? And we're already seeing that in places like California and Florida, where insurers are just pulling out wholesale because
Yeah.
there's no longer a financially viable way to insure houses because they're just too great of a wildfire risk, too great of a hurricane risk. So that's it is this big issue. So when we articulate what we're asking companies to do, it's thinking beyond just the operations to include the scope of their policy influence. Which politicians are you helping get elected? And yes, you're probably going to prioritize the ones that are cozy with your industry, or that really care about the things that your industry cares about, or the ones that are maybe more aggressive against regulation, or less inclined to impose taxes. But are those also politicians that are going to block climate action from moving forward? Because if so, how are you prioritizing, let's say, your tax bill versus your ability to deliver on your carbon commitments to your stakeholders? There was a great example of this from Google, who actually, I should say Alphabet, the parent company, publicly communicated that they would not be able to reach their decarbonization goals of their electricity purchases if there wasn't an appropriate policy response. So Google actually came out publicly in support of the investments from the Inflation Reduction Act, even though there was consideration of increasing corporate taxes, because, okay, this is something that we see as part of our commitments to our stakeholders, even to our shareholders, because it's something that they talk about in annual filings. They articulate the climate risks, right? And therefore, it's something that they need to support also publicly and also politically.
Yeah, but the incentive or the positive behind is for that is it makes it a level playing field.
Exactly. Yeah.
So to speak, right? Because and what I'm doing in recycling, et cetera, is I deal with a lot of companies that aren't doing or aren't using recycled content because they don't have to yet. So I'll worry about that when it happens, right? They could easily be doing it, but not, because it's a bit more difficult to do right now because it's still the logistics behind particularly plastics, which I'm in, is it's infantile. It's in its infancy. It's really the logistics are terrible for it. It's not the technologies to be able to recycle. It's the fact that you can't collect any. I mean, 6% in the United States. Come on, it's awful. It's absolutely awful and ridiculous. But so the Alphabet's motivation really is, this is correct, but if we're going to do this, everybody needs to be doing this, right? And that's the motivation for it.
Pay a premium to be doing the right thing. We want the right thing to be level playing field for everyone, right? That's and that's, I think, something that everyone across the political spectrum can agree on. We want the markets to be fair. We don't want governments to be picking winners and losers, because, as you mentioned earlier, when that happens, you crush innovation and the system ultimately collapses. We don't want to be picking winners and losers, but we want the rules to be set up in a way that is fair. And for me, fair also means, to the communities that are currently sitting downwind of the remaining coal-fired power plants in the United States, because they're not getting a fair shake of things either. That's the kind of public health angle of all of this as well. But it's fair to the companies. So we don't want the companies that are doing the right things to be penalized for it. We want them to be rewarded. We want the ones that are investing in sustainability to be ahead of the curve. And so if something like a carbon tax were ever to be implemented, they're the ones that are already, facing less costs because they've taken those investments, they've made those right choices. So, but then the question is, How are those executives holding their government affairs accountable? How are they educating their government affairs people on the sustainability priorities of the company?
Hmm.
Often you have sustainability leaders and government affairs leaders in completely different parts of the organization. Are they talking to each other?
Yeah.
Do they know what are the sustainability dynamics and commitments and priorities of the company? And is that getting translated to the policymakers that are then in conversation with the company leaders?
Yeah. So how are you facilitating this? Are you working inside the companies and going to the companies? Are you lobbying at the government level, or both? Or are you guys still figuring where that is? Are you
So
still
I'll
kind of weighing those scales and going, okay, this works, that doesn't?
Yeah, I'll say two things. Um, One, we are leveraging a framework that was developed out of the Herb Institute at the University of Michigan, which,
Hmm.
fun fact, is the sustainability business program that Stu Hart founded.
Oh, there you go. Fantastic.
Yep, and we are trying to shift we're trying to help create a norm in the business community by bringing education about corporate political responsibility into business education. So we're focused not directly on companies, but by talking to students, because
Yeah,
if this is something
brilliant.
that students care about, then they might be more inclined to talk about it with recruiters, to make employment decisions on the basis of which companies are more publicly, civically engaged in a positive way on climate. And they will bring these ideas with them into the boardroom so that you have a, a group of business leaders that sees the connection between operational sustainability and the political engagement piece.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's a brilliant tactic. It's been used by many people. It's why you find Bloomberg terminals in financial schools, which
Yep.
was a brilliant. Michael Bloomberg was no dummy. I'm sure you'll agree. He was a pretty smart guy, or still is actually. But yeah, it's a brilliant way to do it. Is to bring that awareness and that capability. Are you promoting also? The like what Stu Hart brings to the table as well is people's understanding that this is not an environmental movement of today. This is in my mind, it's not. Even though the impacts are important, I understand that. I totally agree with you with the climate change and the urgency of what needs to be done. But it's really getting back to the way society was. This is kind of that sine wave turning back to, right? Because societies do this, right? They get promiscuous, they get more prudent, they get more. It happens. It happens all the time. This is really is that explained to the people how Stu Hart really presented it to us on this podcast was like this is how businesses started out, right? And then
Mhm.
they lost it, and then they went back to it, and then they lost it again, and then are we on that precipice of getting back to it, which I believe we are. And maybe I'm just an optimistic person, but is it brought to the students in that way too? Do you see the benefits in that and what you guys are doing, that this isn't a novel idea and you're not a nut job, you're basically getting back to what business really is about?
I think that's an important part of communicating the possibility, because if you just look at business over the last 40 years, it's really easy to lose hope and just say,
Right,
okay,
sure it is.
corporate raiders and um, bloodthirsty private equity and, you know,
Arbitrage, the whole thing.
investor activists that are just in it
bud
to
Bud
force
Fox.
companies to yeah, it's it that's then it feels really hopeless. And if there's so much despair around climate action, I feel like it's important to be in touch with the stress of it all, right? And
Yeah.
the reality of the wildfires, of the hurricanes, of the droughts, the reality of the fights, the arguments about it, the difficulty of finding alignment. That's all, being in touch with that is important, but then you have to have that vision of what is possible. And I think seeing, okay, there was a different understanding of what fiduciary duty meant. And it was
Mm,
considered responsible to actually pay your employees responsibly. And that could be part of a valid business strategy.
mm.
I think fiduciary duty is in particular a really important one to change the narrative. I think there's a lot of dynamism about what expectations are around fiduciary duty right now. And the way I like to think about it is, well, actually, fiduciary duty means responsibility not just to the shareholders, but also to the company. So if you're doing something for the long term interest of the company, then that's in your fiduciary duty. And
Yeah.
sustainability is in the long term interest of your company because
Well,
of.
yeah, you're getting into the business one. This is why I say it's business 101 in many cases. Duh.
Mhm.
Right? Yeah. Totally with you.
So pointing to those, the historical examples are really powerful, just to help frame it. It doesn't have to be like this. It's a choice. It's a set of business norms, and because it's a choice and a set of norms, it means that we can change it. There's a possibility to
Right.
evolve, and there's so much appetite for that right now. But we're at this. It feels very much like we're at a crossroads. Are we going to say, um, actually, we want to move away from democratic institutions. We want business to function. We want government to function more like a business and have layoffs and um, just focus on, you know, cutting waste rather than on serving populations. Um, there's that is one way of going, of proceeding from here. Or you can say, I want government to function like business in the sense of being ethical and responsible leaders that have the long-term vision and are responsive to the needs of their customers and their shareholders and are.
Now you're getting crazy. Who are you, George Washington? What are we talking about here? Come on now. This is old school thinking. We don't think that way anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. I mean, it was Stewart. You know, we 80% of growth is just stock buyback instead of and not investment in new technology and new products and new services or bettering what it is. There's our financial institution,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's awful. And I don't know if you're familiar with Chris Draper. He's founder and CEO of a company called ESG RAC, RAC, and very very interesting guy. And his philosophy really, and what he's driving towards is, why is earnings the sole story of the value of a company? Why is that? Which is exactly what we're talking about. But he takes it further. He's building an infrastructure of these instruments, these digital instruments, to bring value to the impacts of that company. Right. So kind of like carbon credits type of thing, but it may have to do with employment or uh, agricultural runoff or whatever, all these different things that are out there. Like Hershey's spending $500 million that is going directly to the cocoa farmers to improve their livelihood and improve their practices, to fight child labor and to fight unsustainable environmental impacts on cocoa farming and that type of stuff. Why is that should be of a huge value for investors to dump money to then invest in that? Why is the earnings the only thing that tells the story and motivates people in the stock market and the finance? And that's where I say marketing and that type of stuff has a huge responsibility in that, right? What you have thoughts on that?
Well, wouldn't it be nice if we had incentive structures so that the companies that were doing the right thing were also earning the most, right? That's the big debate around considering ESG factors in your investment decisions.
Right.
There's a divergence in the data, in research that says, okay, is this actually predictive of financial performance? If you are
Mm-hmm.
having a good relationship with your employees, if you are taking care of your suppliers or ensuring that your suppliers can also earn a healthy profit, if you're doing all of those good corporate citizen things, does that translate to greater earnings? And I've seen some data that suggests, okay, it might be better, it might be worse, but actually it drives better financial outcomes during times of uncertainty and downturns. But there is still enough debate around it that it's not a home run, right? There's
But
a
can it be looked at as like hedging, like using
mm,
futures, where it's a zero sum game that is actually to benefit, right? I mean, is there room for that type of thing? I mean, you look at like Southwest Airlines, the whole thing. The only airline to not go out of business because of fuel prices, because they were hedging, because they
mhm.
understood that it's a zero sum game. It is the windfalls are gone, but the going out of business, chapter 11 is eliminated off the table too. Here is my cost that I can live within these line items on my P&L, and all things given equal, here's my profit margin that I can live with, and I can grow it through other means, but I lock this in through hedging. Is there an opportunity there to kind of sell this to the people, or does it not lend itself to that type of thing? Because that's what you're talking about, right? Where do they see this? Because long term, yeah, there's soft savings. They recruit better people. They retain people better. Their employees are overall performance is better because they love the job more, et cetera. They're helping with the environment, so therefore their raw materials sourcing should be better. All these things should be better that maybe you can't measure in an instant stock ticker move, but neither can you with hedging, right?
Mhm.
You
I
see a more
Yeah.
level playing field, and it's the result of that hedge. Does that make sense?
I really like the idea of coming up with more creative financial instruments, or coming up with better mechanisms, financial platforms for
Yeah,
providing the right incentives. I think the challenge is always, how do you get it to scale, and how do you get it to scale fast enough? Because
yeah,
there are so many um, there's so many good news stories around responsible and sustainable business. I look at, let's say, the B Corp movement, right? This is an
mm,
entirely novel corporate structure that was set up so that you could have a commitment by the company to do right by society. And that was huge. That's a
yeah,
completely novel, innovative, creative thing. But what fraction of the S&P 500 is B Corps, right? And the thing about climate change is, it's so much a race against time. Every year it gets harder to make the changes and make the deep cuts that are required. So what are the biggest levers that we can push on? And I love that there's all of this energy, and people are trying to find these solutions in every little corner of the economy. And I think that has led to some great successes, like the explosion of solar power in the United States, and renewable electricity in general. That is a lot of people that have been working and doing that incremental improvements and getting the economies of scale. But that's also kind of because China decided to invest in solar power, right? So that was
oh yeah,
also
sure,
like a
yeah.
policy
Got to keep
decision.
up with the Joneses. Got to keep up with the Joneses type of thing, right?
And it's accelerated in the United States because of the funding from the Inflation Reduction Act.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
there are ways that we can supercharge that innovation and make ESG rack the way to evaluate companies, because the incentives are aligned, and that's why we
Well, I'm
we
gonna have to
keep
tell
kind of.
Chris Draper to listen to this that you endorsed this guy. No, just kidding. But yeah, no, that his philosophy is right.
Yeah.
It is the right thing. And what he's talking about is somehow using a financial instrument to incentivize responsible capitalism and bringing
Yeah.
that back.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what we're talking about.
But how
Do
can
you
you make
see?
that the default financial system, right?
Well, in my opinion, and yeah, we're here to have a discussion. My opinion, a strong or a rather difficult roadblock, which may not be surmountable, is the desire for political power. It is a thing that parties can demonize, right, or overinflate the positives in order to split and try and get power. And you understand what I'm saying? You've got one side saying, hey, this is a drain on economies and it's hurting our economy and we need to move forward because nobody else is investing in it. We need to do this. The other side is saying, hey, the world's going to explode tomorrow. And so we need to do everything, even without testing it. We need to implement it right this very second. And while 90% of us in the middle, I contend, see the BS on both sides of that, right? There are impacts and we need to go this way, right? But it doesn't mean that we need to make 18 million, pounds or tons of wind turbine blades without any study on is there a better way to do it? Because there's so many other cool mechanisms now that are starting to come out after the fact, and even better and stronger type of materials than the fiberglass. Because you can't recycle fiberglass, you just can't. It's one of those things that is done. Mm-hmm. So is there a better way? And there are better ways to do that can be done now. And there's different types of twirling, solar or wind power, et cetera, and different things. So that needs to be evangelized. That needs to be marketed. And then again, I say marketing comes down to it, right? Because there's nobody that's in that middle ground going, like where you guys are, where I see you guys at, is that middle ground powerfully coming up and saying, look, this is baloney and that's baloney. And if you call BS on both sides and come to the middle, now you're gonna get the majority of people going, yep, Amy's right. This is where we go. Because that's where most people are, right?
Yeah. One of the things that I hear from the business community about the political landscape is that business cycles are longer than election cycles. You can't just look at the next 2 years. So there should be, or there is a lot of reason for businesses to do exactly that, to call baloney on both sides, to say we need smart and effective policies that help establish fair rules of the game that allow us to address these fundamental risks that are facing our society right now. And I think that's what's maybe somewhat disturbing about what's happening right now in the corporate political landscape in the United States. There's, not only does climate change pose a pretty existential risk to capitalism and the structure of society, but you also have the erosion of democratic institutions, and companies do best in a democracy that works, right?
Yeah,
companies
absolutely
want to have the potential to be the one that wins and not the one that got picked by your dictator, right?
Yeah, they don't want to be part of the of the 5-year plan.
So what are companies doing to make sure that there is no 5-year plan, that there is a 4-year election cycle that comes up, and then there's another?
But that's part of the difficulty too, as well, right? I mean, is that the political landscape in the United States swings so far, like a pendulum, every 4 years. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm not saying we shouldn't be this way. It's just it's a hurdle because it is so far this way and that way that pendulum is just swinging further and further each time. When it used to be a bit like this,
Yeah.
yeah. Now it's gaining that momentum, man, and and eventually it's got to come back down to this, where there's this side, that side. But right now it's this side I want power, that side I want power, and I will politicize every little thing to the nth degree to get that, instead of, hey, it used to be we agreed on the ends. It was just the means to get there that were different. We don't even agree on the ends anymore.
And that's
That
something that the business community can support with, right? Because
right.
it's we want prosperity. We want
Yeah.
to be able to continue to grow. And there's a lot of opportunity to find that often elusive common ground. There was a great example, one of the positive stories of companies organized by the nonprofit series that went to Capitol Hill and talked to Republican lawmakers during the reconciliation bill discussions
Okay.
to
Yeah.
make arguments for certain provisions within the Inflation Reduction Act, saying, yes, we actually do want to continue to invest in renewable electricity infrastructure. Yes, we still want to invest in charging infrastructures for electric vehicles because of all of these reasons, of all of these elements of the business case. And it wasn't just, Patagonia and Ben and Jerry's showing up. It was companies across the kind of more conventional companies as well, and not just the climate leaders. So there are
Yeah.
opportunities to walk back to help reduce the swing of that pendulum, but it takes bravery, because right now it's a political climate where speaking up does come at this huge risk of facing very specific personal backlash.
Yeah. Yep.
You
Yep. Yep. No, I agree.
raise your
I
head
agree.
and say, I support the funding from the Inflation Reduction Act, or I support climate action because of the risk that it poses to the viability of my business. And there's a risk of facing a lawsuit or getting hauled in front of a House committee, right? Those
Right.
costs are real to business, but they're also short-term costs. And the long-term costs of inaction, as we've talked about, are so much worse. And it's not something that you can just wait out, right?
Well, even if, do you think we need to concentrate a bit more on uh, the social impacts, and maybe corrections that are possible opportunities in climate action and in responsible capitalism? In other words, reversing or adjusting the haves and have-nots to bring those have-nots into the picture more. We had that ability with oil and we didn't do it, right? And now we have the ability with green energy to do it. Will we? Or won't we? Because green energy can be produced virtually anywhere, maybe not by the same mechanisms, but there are so many different ways to create it, whether it's tidal pools or like I was laughing about, what was it? Who was it? The French were going to make, and the only reason I laughed at it is because they still call them wind turbines, but underwater wind farms. And I'm like, okay, you got to call it something else. It's not a
Where's
wind
the
farm.
wind again?
Yeah, exactly. It's a brilliant idea, and I get it. It's the ocean currents and stuff like that, but they were still calling them wind farms. Like, okay, you got to change the name. But I guess it was so you had the proper visual. But they're turbines. It's hydropower, but in open ocean using currents instead of a stream or a river, or utilizing a dam. But you get the picture. You can do this just about anywhere, right? With a different mechanism, whether it be solar, whether it be wind, or whether it be whatever it happens to be. I mean, there's even technologies now where it is possible for you to build a structure in the middle of the desert that not only grows agriculture, anything on its own, powers itself, it also produces drinking water. I've interviewed the people who have all the different parts of this. You could easily put it together with a few $1 billion, but okay, what's a few $1 billion these days? That's like $20 back in 1970. Might not be that bad, but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
The technology is there. You can do it. You could actually have a data center, right, that we desperately need for the power and for the AI and all this other stuff, right? You could have a data center that then powers an agricultural farm that is indoors, utilizing the heat that is then creating the power that powers the data center. We have that technology. The investment needs to be put into it. It's there if you put all these different pieces together. I mean, they even have a spray Teflon, like a Teflon spray. It's a spray, a coating that improves photosynthesis, photocells by like 30%. Just, just, just like that. I mean, it's there.
Yeah.
Right.
Multi-solving is so important. There's so many needs. There's so many opportunities to improve people's lives, and thinking creatively about how to do that is, I think, I mean, we talked about why capitalism is the right structure. If you can find a way to tackle all of those problems and drive that innovation, then more power to you. Let's do it, right?
Yeah.
Let's
Right.
let's figure out how to motivate and reward all of those innovators.
I'm just saying that should be a motivation as well as climate, shouldn't it? I mean, shouldn't it be? Because that helps everybody, right? The haves and have-nots is the cause of wars. It's the cause of the structure, the issues with the border and fentanyl and all that kind of stuff. It's have and have-nots, right? We've known this for years. We've argued about it for years. If we build up the economy of Mexico, it improves the United States. If we build up the economies and the lifestyle and the society of Central America and South America, it improves us. India, Bangladesh, Congo,
Yeah.
South Africa, Nigeria, and we have those technologies to do that. And I see the climate and what you're proposing and what you're evangelizing. When we're talking about the blue ocean to change all that and uplift all the boats with the tide is there.
Yeah.
Will we do it? Is the issue.
We started I yes, right? We started with climate because that's where our hearts are, myself and my co-founder.
Sure.
But our analysis is we are shining the spotlight on the misalignments, the political misalignments that happen around climate change, because it is such an urgent issue, and the business case is so clear for the corporate sector in general that this is action, right? If you have a company that has decarbonization commitments internally, even within scope 3, their broader supply chain, but then they're helping elect climate deniers and advocating against common sense climate regulation, then okay, what gives, right? That feels like a clear place where we can rally people around that. But the call to action is corporate political responsibility. It is being clear on the consequences of on the trade-offs that are implicit in your policy recommendations, because companies shouldn't just be responsible when it comes to their environmental actions. It should also be responsible in their broader set of policies. And we think that if 100%. that changes the dynamics of political influence, and should, in our vision, will help shift the balance of power away from companies, which dominate the policy landscape, and towards the electorate, which helps address the other questions like inequality and eroding democratic institutions. Because runaway inequality and income and wealth, as you're talking about the haves and the have-nots, is also bad for business. The Nobel
It's awful.
Prize in economics this year went to Daron Acemoglu, whose work is specifically on the relationship between prosperity and inequality. And his work is that inclusive institutions and inclusive economies lead to better outcomes for business, right? There is a business case for caring about income inequality, and it's that you'll do better, right? It's the same. You have to take a step back. You have to look at it at a system level. The same way with climate action, I think there are fewer small instances to point to. You can point to wildfires, you can point to hurricanes to say these are the consequences that companies are feeling, as opposed to the big revolutions when people actually pick up their pitchforks. But those dynamics are real as well, and it's something that business should be paying attention to.
Yeah, agree 100%. I mean, you're talking about investing in the bottom of the pyramid instead of just extracting wealth from the top. I believe that's what you're saying, which is a concept I think Dow has had for years, decades.
Yeah,
investing in the bottom of that pyramid to build up. And there's many companies that do it. You may even work for one right now, but I won't say that because I'm sure. In fact, I know for a fact that's part of their philosophy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and it's brilliant. It's business 101, in my opinion, that people forget real quick because they get addicted to that extraction of wealth just to extract wealth, and they forget that once you pulled it, there's nothing to support it anymore. If you don't support this doesn't happen, and you have to because it grows up. It's got to be like this. As soon as it goes like that, it's over. Right. You start at a pyramid, you go to a stovepipe, and then you go to an inverted pyramid, and then it's a matter of time before, not if, just when it falls.
And I mean, it's very much a generational driver, right? There was all of the panic about quiet quitting, about Gen Z not wanting to work hard properly, not having the grit. But they see that there isn't the same kind of investment in employees, in training, in the same sharing of the fruits of their labors. That was part of the deal. That was part of the social contract 60 years ago. But
it's not there anymore.
So no wonder that the new generations entering the workforce have lower levels of motivation, right? Then
exactly.
That is something that does create a drain on a company's resources. I remember seeing statistics that are like highly motivated employees can perform 30% better, have a 30% greater contribution to the company's bottom line.
Oh yeah, and for sure. Absolutely.
That's coming from trust. That's coming from this feeling that we're in it together. So that's, I mean, absolutely. The bottom of the pyramid.
Yeah, this whole ridiculous idea of the ridiculous notion of quiet quitting. Remember that crap? Yep. You were silently firing them. Mm-hmm. They're leaving for a reason. It's because you were silently pushing them out the door or unconsciously firing them, whatever it happens to be. But we weren't just leaving for a reason, for no reason. It wasn't a silent firing or quitting that was going on. It was, anyways,
absolutely.
This has been fantastic. Go ahead, please.
But that's, I mean, another reason why we're focused on the business students as the mechanism for change, because I think that fight for talent, realizing the importance of employees is something that companies haven't forgotten, right? They may have, maybe different priorities, but it's still core to a company's success. So how do you engage and motivate those employees? Well, one way to demotivate them is when you're talking out of both sides of your mouth, when you're saying one thing.
The S meters are way more sensitive these days.
Exactly. With social media, people are savvy and will call you out. Yeah. So, it's worthwhile for companies to take a hard look at their political engagement, because it matters to their youngest employees, and they will call you out, right? so many
They will
business cases
definitely play.
to focus on it.
So, are you actively involved with the students yourself in these? Are you
Yeah.
seeing a resurgence because they're everywhere of entrepreneurship because of these notions, because of the issues where they're seeing the blue ocean of opportunity and going, I could change this, or I can do this better. And isn't that something that corporations can utilize to their advantage to overcome some of these hurdles, is to institute that entrepreneurial spirit within their company?
Absolutely. I think one of the most toxic things a company can do is, co-opt all of that creative energy and say, you know what, we really only just want you to focus on doing a beach cleanup. The
Yeah,
company should be tapping
that's
that.
patronizing almost, right?
Yeah,
Here's
yeah,
$5. Go away, kid.
exactly.
Go start your lemonade stand and leave me alone.
As opposed to saying, we're seeing significant shifts in the European market. That means our customers care significantly more about sustainability. What are we doing to outcompete our competitors? What are we doing to get ahead of the game? Um,
Hmm.
and I I guess we work directly with students. A lot of our um, a lot of our man hours comes from student volunteers, and I continue to be blown away by the level of creativity and energy that students bring to our work. um, we have a team right now that are they're figuring out how to balance volunteering with us around graduation and doing job searches and signing up to volunteer over their summers. And there is so much energy from people who want to tackle these problems and make a positive impact. And that's absolutely an underutilized resource in the workforce.
Mm.
So,
Yeah.
we're very happy to take up that creativity and direct it
Yeah.
towards our aims. So,
Yeah. There you go.
if
There you
there
go.
are any
So
students out there, young professionals that are interested in getting involved,
let's
that's our
let's
shout out.
do that right now. We've blown sprinted past our hour allotment and keep going. And like so many others, I'm going to have to say we're gonna uh, have a follow up someday soon to see where you guys are going. But who needs to go to Alliance number 4A, or no, Alliance number 4RC.org? Who do you want going there? Who needs to go there? And what are they going to find?
Yeah. So students that are interested in the intersection of sustainability, business, and policy, or you know, early career talent that are interested in getting involved as well, and companies that are curious about this space, about the corporate political responsibility, understand the risks posed by having misalignment in their between what they're doing in their operations and what they're doing in the policy landscape. Our website is sort of light touch right now because, again,
Mm-hmm.
2-person volunteer basis.
Yeah, but it's there's enough there to understand what's going on for sure.
And we have our news primarily through our LinkedIn feed. So that's a place to stay tuned. We're launching version 2 of the ESG Dilemma Design Challenge, a competition that I referenced very briefly at the beginning of this conversation, which is a
Is it
competition.
like a hack? Is that on here?
Yeah, it's posted through our LinkedIn page and is actually a separate website. It's arc-esg-challenge.org. So that's a competition where students help propose ideas for how the banking sector can move towards net zero while navigating all of the political tensions around ESG. And we have
Oh wow, that's easy quick.
yeah,
I'll give you the answer after the show.
keeping it light.
Yeah. Wow.
We are looking to publish some materials. We supported a student to do an independent study that was focused on how you can incorporate CPR, corporate political responsibility, into typical business classes. So we'll post about things like that and resources that we're generating. So it's, we're organizing webinars to have discussions around this. So stay tuned, follow us on LinkedIn, and
Yeah.
happy to connect with anyone out there who thinks this stuff is interesting.
That's fantastic. Fantastic. I love it. Thank you so much, Amy. This has been really, really, really interesting and engaging conversation. I hope everybody else out there has at least been inspired to maybe think or at least see things a little bit different at the minimum, and kind of understand that there's this middle where we all are, that requires us to seriously consider these things and incorporate them into our daily decisions and how we filter the information that comes into us from all over the place, because it is very, very important stuff. It's one of those things that we're going to read about hopefully one day and go, man, that was unbelievable how important those things were, that were so nuanced and we are kind of under the surface of consciousness for most people, that need to be shouted from the rooftops, in my opinion. And I applaud what you're doing. I thank you so much for being on.
Thank you so much for taking the time and for your good questions.
Oh, you're well. Well, it's because I don't know anything. That's why I could ask good questions. But I appreciate that. Everybody, thank you so much for downloading and watching and listening to Sustainiacs. Until next time, peace and love.